Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. The Supreme Court today faces a decision that could reshape women's athletics nationwide. We speak with a civil rights attorney for analysis. The Trump administration ends temporary protected status for Somalis. The decision comes as Minnesota faces a widespread fraud scandal. President Trump is visiting Detroit today to refocus attention on U.S. manufacturing and his efforts to tackle high consumer costs. What to know about his schedule? The House Oversight Committee said it will seek to hold former President Bill Clinton in contempt of Congress. That's after the former president and his wife Hillary Clinton refused to testify in the House's Jeffrey Epstein investigation. And President Trump is calling on the Iranian people to take over institutions run by the regime. What the president says about America sending help to the protesters.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Today is Tuesday, January 13th. I'm Stephanie Cox. Former President Bill Clinton could soon face contempt proceedings. The Republican chair of the House Oversight Committee says he's starting that process. That's after Clinton failed to attend a hearing this morning on sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Here's Committee Chair James Comer.
I think it's very disappointing. As a result of Bill Clinton not showing up for his lawful subpoena, which again was voted on unanimously by the committee in a bipartisan manner, we will move next week in the House Oversight Committee markup to hold former President Clinton in contempt of Congress.
A spokesperson for the former president has said that Clinton knew nothing about Epstein's crimes. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has a similar deposition scheduled for tomorrow. Her attorneys say she won't show up either. Lawyers for the Clintons are calling subpoenas from the committee invalid, saying they're legally unenforceable. Former Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith will testify publicly before Congress. The hearing will take place on January 22nd. The testimony will be before the House Judiciary Committee, which is scheduled for 10 a.m. Eastern. Committee Chairman Jim Jordan confirmed the date yesterday. Smith brought 2 criminal cases against President Donald Trump. Both have since been dropped. Smith previously testified in private in December. During that session, he defended his investigation into the president, telling lawmakers the prosecutions were based entirely on Trump's actions. President Trump has said that the cases were an abuse of the legal system, citing political motivation. And the number of reported deaths in Iran keeps rising. President Trump is now directly calling on the Iranian people to dismantle institutions, saying help is on the way. Trump took to social media this morning saying Iranian patriots keep protesting, take over your institutions, save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price, unquote. Trump also announced that he canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the regime stops killing protesters. The president ended the message by saying help is on its way, make Iran great again. Trump previously said he's considering military options to support the Iranian people and warned the regime against killing protesters. However, the human rights activist news agency now says almost 2,000 demonstrators have been killed in more than 2 weeks of protests. Here's more on the situation in Iran.
President Donald Trump is ramping up pressure on Iran, which is facing its largest anti-government protests in years. On Monday, Trump announced that any nation doing business with Tehran will face a 25% tariff on U.S. trade. He called the order final and conclusive, but is yet to release further details. Iran, which already faces heavy U.S. sanctions, counts China, the United Arab Emirates, and India among its top trading partners. The protests in Iran began after soaring prices and economic hardship, but have since escalated into calls for the fall of the Iranian regime. The U.S. has warned its citizens in Tehran to consider leaving by land to Armenia or Turkey due to the protests. The situation has rattled global oil markets, pushing prices to 7-week highs on Monday due to fears of supply disruptions.
Staying in the Middle East, the Trump administration has designated 3 branches of the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist groups. The Treasury and State Departments announced the actions today. affecting Muslim Brotherhood chapters in Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. The Trump administration said these organizations pose a risk to the U.S. and American interests. President Trump ordered the designation last month. The three branches and their members now face U.S. sanctions. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement, quote, "The United States will use all available tools to deprive these Muslim Brotherhood chapters of the resources to engage in or support terrorism." Jordan and Egypt have also banned the Muslim Brotherhood in their countries. Other U.S. allies in the region, such as Qatar and Turkey, are more tolerant of the organization. And the Trump administration is ending temporary protected status for thousands of Somalis in the United States. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says they'll be required to leave by March 17th.
It is corrupt, and it was under the leadership of Governor Walz and this mayor that they allowed.
In a statement to Fox News today, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said, quote, "Temporary means temporary." She added that country conditions in Somalia have improved to the point that it no longer meets the law's requirement for temporary protected status. She also said allowing Somali nationals to remain temporarily in the U.S. is contrary to our national interests. Trump said in November that he was terminating deportation protections for Somalis living in Minnesota. The decision comes as federal authorities investigate reports of widespread fraud in the state. And an update on alleged widespread fraud in Minnesota. In an exclusive interview with Blaze TV, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says investigators have uncovered schemes far larger than expected, with illegally obtained taxpayer funds sent overseas. NTD's Daniel Monahan has the key takeaways from Bessent's interview with Blaze TV host Christopher Rufo.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Minnesota has become a blueprint for uncovering similar fraud nationwide.
The American people are the most generous people in the world. You just can't take advantage of us. When immigrants come here, you got to learn which side of the road to drive on, customs and laws to follow, and that you cannot steal from the U.S. government the way you did from your government.
Bessent says fraudsters have set up an organized scheme to game the system.
Benefits have been turned into businesses. It is a cottage industry of teaching people how to form multiple LLCs, how to game the system, how to move money around, and we'll see where the money goes.
The Treasury Secretary raised concerns about what he calls massive leakage of public assistance funds leaving the country.
If you are on public assistance and you are sending money out of the country, one of two things must be true. You are getting too much assistance because you have excess funds to feed yourself, your family, food, clothing, or you've got stolen money and you're sending that out. But in either case, money needs to stay in the U.S. or your benefits need to be cut.
Bessent touched on potential cover-ups, saying there are evidently tapes of Attorney General Keith Ellison in meetings with people who donated to him.
Them calling for political favors to stop the investigations. So we'll see. But again, I don't want to get out ahead of the investigations. It's going to be very methodical. And Chris, I can guarantee you when the bear trap snaps, we're going to get these folks.
The Treasury Secretary says his interview was originally planned at the Minnesota State Capitol, but Governor Tim Walz refused to guarantee Bessent would be provided any police security.
He is afraid of what is coming, and he's not going to be able to hide behind this curtain because we will get there, and I don't have to go in the Capitol building to investigate him. I would love for him to come to Treasury and answer some questions. I can guarantee you that he will be safe and sound then, depending on what we discover. I don't know about his future.
Bessent also discussed an alleged bribery attempt.
One of the Somali fraudsters tried to bribe a juror with $120,000. Well, it turned out she'd been given $200,000 to bribe the juror, and she skimmed $80,000.
Bessent further warned that protests obstructing federal law enforcement appear coordinated and funded.
Someone is financing them. There are safe houses that when you see the 300 people with the same laser that they're using to blind DHS agents in courthouses in Portland, someone bought those lasers. And again, what we do is follow the money.
The Treasury Secretary talked about all the luxury cars and properties bought from Minnesota to East Africa.
How the hell did this happen? How did it happen? Like, President Trump is outraged. I'm outraged. The American people should be outraged.
The Treasury has announced that IRS civil enforcement teams are auditing financial institutions suspected of facilitating the laundering of Minnesota fraud proceeds. In addition, the IRS will soon launch a dedicated task force to work alongside criminal investigators and prosecutors to recover funds and prevent fraudulent nonprofits from exploiting federal programs. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thank you, Daniel. And the Department of Homeland Security is facing legal challenges over immigration enforcement in Minnesota. The state is suing the Trump administration over ICE deployments. The lawsuit comes amid protests following the fatal shooting of a woman by an ICE agent. Here are the details.
Minnesota is suing the federal government over a surge in ICE agents to the Twin Cities. The state is calling it unconstitutional and unlawful. The lawsuit names Secretary Kristi Noem and alleges DHS is targeting Minnesota for political reasons.
We allege that the obvious targeting of Minnesota for our diversity, for our democracy, and our differences of opinion with the federal government is a violation of the Constitution and of federal law.
The department is pushing back, saying immigration and customs enforcement is federal law enforcement and belongs everywhere that federal law applies. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons told Fox News yesterday that ICE is present in all 50 states, and law enforcement in states like Texas and Florida cooperate with ICE instead of opposing it.
If we have ICE agents or deportation officers that are being harassed and impeded, their state law enforcement and local law enforcement actually comes to the aid of ICE, not turn down our 911 calls, not show up to a protest. You know, we only are increasing our numbers because ICE agents are getting attacked due to the lax policies that Minnesota has.
Lyons also said that Minnesota is a sanctuary state.
They don't honor our detainers, and they release criminals back into the neighborhood.
In a press release yesterday, DHS said ICE has removed child abusers, drug traffickers, and domestic violence perpetrators from Minnesota's streets. Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said the department will not let rioters or sanctuary politicians slow it down from arresting and removing the worst of the worst in Minnesota.
Illinois also unveiled a lawsuit yesterday. It accuses the administration of creating turmoil and imposing a climate of fear in the state and in the city of Chicago. Still to come, a landmark report lays out ways to stave off a decline in family life here in America. The Heritage Foundation's president joins us for insight. And a couple of Republican senators say they will block President Trump's Federal Reserve nominees. They're protesting the DOJ's investigation into Fed Chair Jerome Powell. President Trump denies knowledge of the investigation. Those stories and more after this. Welcome back. People just aren't starting families as much as they used to. And the ones that do have a rockier time than before. Where does that leave our hearts, our minds, and our nation? A new Heritage Foundation report delves into all that and offers some interesting ways to fix it. With us now is Dr. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation. Good to have you with us, Dr. Roberts.
Thanks so much. I'm so proud of my colleagues for issuing this landmark study. We hope that it revitalizes marriage and, for that matter, revitalizes the spirit of people welcoming children into their homes.
Certainly, it touches on a lot of things that are very meaningful to a lot of people. And to that point, there's this loneliness epidemic, according to the previous U.S. Surgeon General. People aren't having babies as much as they used to, as I just said. And even the prospect of a simple, straightforward path to old age surrounded by the people we love of all generations kind of seems to be slipping away from so many of us. So to start with, and this does come up in the report, how do you think we got here?
Well, there are certainly a lot of factors that have contributed to this problem. Some of them are cultural, some of them are social, and no doubt many of them are economic, to say nothing of individual decisions that people make, and we will always respect those individual decisions. But the real gist of the report, as you know, is that we claim that federal policy has exacerbated some of those factors by creating disincentives to marriage and, by extension, to having more children. We see that, for example, in our tax code. We see it in some safety net or welfare programs. And so the first step that we call for in the report is to eliminate all of those disincentives toward marriage. And then the second thing we call for, which is the real innovation in this study, is to flip on their head all of those programs within federal policy that have anything to do with marriage and make sure that through innovations in the child care tax credit and innovations in the usage of the adoption tax credit, that we can incentivize marriage and also childbirth.
And you also speak about the role of cultural institutions in reviving family life, if you'd like to touch on that.
It's a really important part of it. In fact, we would say that as important as it is to get federal policy right, that those cultural factors, those institutions, as you put it so well, are upstream, if you will, of the politics and policy of this. And so the most important of those cultural institutions, obviously, is the family. But our nuclear families are served by institutions like schools and universities and Rotary clubs and bowling leagues and so on. Very longstanding argument in the United States about the importance of those. And so we call for a role in federal policy there as well. For example, there has been a longstanding program of the federal government to fund what is called a marriage boot camp. That sounds sort of involuntary, but in fact, it's totally voluntary for couples that are not married but living together. We argue that one of the enhancements that federal policy could make is to turn that into a grant program, a block grant program, in which the people's tax money would be given to local nonprofit providers who would develop programs at the behest, at the request of these couples to learn how to be better couples. These are very simple innovations that the United States has overlooked in the realm of policy that could aid these cultural institutions.
Yeah, your report delves into so many aspects of how we got here, and some of the things that really stood out to me, for example, were that people are often choosing to have a standard family, but say without initially getting married, and the research that shows that that doesn't really put them in the best stead for the longevity of their life together and their family. So if you could speak to that. Yeah.
It's such an important point. Thank you for asking the question and for delving into that detail in the paper, because the best, least politicized social science research shows that there is a certain sequence which almost guarantees success in life. Graduating from high school, going to college, getting married, being open to life, having children. And the great part about our paper is that it rests upon this unpoliticized social science research. The second aspect of this is what people want. It is clear to us in analyzing this research and looking at public opinion surveys that while, of course, this is the United States and we respect people's decisions as individuals, the majority of American men and women do want to be married. They do want to be married and to have children. And so what we're saying is that it's high time that federal policy and state policy reflect these desires of the American people. In fact, that policy, as I have mentioned, not only doesn't reflect the desires of our people to be married and to have families, it's actually undermined those desires. So we have a lot of work to do in Washington to update this policy to reflect the mood of the American people. And I think what we will see is that when federal policymakers and state policymakers start making these decisions, that the cultural institutions will follow.
And I do want to dig into some of the key recommendations you have for Congress, but something else that really stood out to me was this talk in this very in-depth report about soulmates. And you say that in the report that the very idea of soulmates could actually be stopping some people from having happy, long-lived marriages. If you could speak to what the research shows that they can do to turn this around, this trend.
Yeah, there are some great studies by my colleagues at Heritage, but also by some great social scientists, again, across the political spectrum. And this actually connects to your point about your opening point about loneliness, that many Americans are desiring to be married, and they have this sort of platinum level standard about finding their soulmate. And I mean, I can tell you from personal experience that I didn't realize my wife was my soulmate until we were married for a few years. It didn't mean that we didn't want to get married. It didn't mean that we didn't enjoy each other's company. We didn't enjoy married life. But that's the kind of thing that takes time. And so what that social science research proves is what we intuit. In fact, what we emote as human beings. And we're saying that federal policy and state policy should reflect a reality that people know anecdotally, as I has related an anecdote about myself, but also one that we know sort of universally. And I think what we're going to see is as federal policymakers talk about this, given this permission, if you will, from this social science research, that leaders of cultural institutions, whether they be churches, whether they be leaders of schools or universities, are going to be part of this national conversation as well. And that all is going to help the dynamic that you put your finger on.
Well, there's a lot of deep and wide-ranging research outlined in this report, and I know all of that funnels into your varied and many recommendations for Congress, many solutions you put forward, and I wish we could speak longer, but that's all we have time for now. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin Rubb. It's good to have you on.
We're so grateful for your interest. Thank you.
Next, Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams has died after a battle with prostate cancer. He was 68 years old. Adams' ex-wife, Shelley, made the announcement today. Dilbert was a satirical comic strip that made fun of American office culture. The series ran from 1989 to 2023. Adams also hosted a live stream podcast entitled Real Coffee with Scott Adams. President Trump took to Truth Social today to express his condolences to Adams' family, friends, and listeners. Trump posted, quote, "Sadly, the great influencer Scott Adams has passed away. He was a fantastic guy who liked and respected me when it wasn't fashionable to do so." Trump added that Adams will be truly missed. And our thoughts go out to Adams' family as well. This morning, President Trump is again calling on Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to lower interest rates. This comes as some lawmakers on Capitol Hill are expressing concern over a new DOJ investigation related to the chairman. A couple of senators are blocking President Trump's Federal Reserve nominees.
Republican senators, including Elisa Murkowski and Tom Tillis, are questioning the authenticity of an investigation into Chairman Jerome Powell. Now, in a bid to urge officials to quickly resolve the case, these senators are vowing to block President Trump's Federal Reserve nominees.
I very seldom disagree with the president, but I've disagreed with bad advice he's been given and acted on.
President Trump has denied knowledge of the investigation, though he previously threatened legal action against Powell, accusing him of incompetence. Senator Murkowski, the latest, joined Senator Tillis in ramping up the pressure around this investigation, raised concerns about the fact that this investigation revolves around project cost overruns, which she says are not unusual. This Department of Justice investigation started over concerns about Powell's handling of the renovation of the Federal Reserve's headquarters. Specifically, investigators are looking into whether Powell committed perjury when he testified to a Senate committee about the project last year. The project is over budget. It was originally approved for $1.9 billion, but now it's costing around $2.5 billion of taxpayer money. The Fed's inspector said that this increase in the price is due to the timeline extension and material costs. The White House Economic Council director yesterday told reporters at the White House that even if cost overruns on projects aren't out of the ordinary, it's still important to know where taxpayer money goes.
Seems like the Justice Department has decided that they want to see what's going on over there with this building that's, massively more expensive than any building in the history of Washington. I think that it's really important to understand where the taxpayer money goes.
Chairman Powell was quick to deny the allegations of the lawsuit and said that the Trump administration only launched it because he refused to lower interest rates to a level that President Trump is happy with.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
While some Republicans aren't comfortable with this investigation, others say it's serious and warranted. Speaker Johnson today doubling down on his previous comments.
If there's a credible allegation or concern that someone's lied to Congress, then the DOJ should investigate. I mean, across the board, no matter who it is, no one is immune from that.
Chairman Powell will be replaced in just a few months as he reaches the end of his term in May. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A New York City Council employee was detained by ICE during a routine immigration appointment on Long Island yesterday. The Department of Homeland Security says he was there illegally and did not have work authorization. Council Speaker Julie Menin said the employee, a Venezuelan national, works as a data analyst and has a work visa. She called the detainment government overreach. DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin disputed those remarks and said he has a criminal record, including for assault. In a post on X, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani called the arrest an assault on democracy, on New York City, and on our values. He called for the employee's release and said he would continue to monitor the situation. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent held a meeting of finance ministers from G7 countries and other major economies yesterday. The agenda included discussing ways to secure and diversify supply chains for critical minerals, especially rare earth elements.
So in this meeting, participants from various countries, they discussed their experience, the steps that they are taking in making the supply chain resilient, especially technology for refining, processing the mineral ores so that high quality critical minerals, especially the rare earth, permanent magnets, those kind of materials can be secured in a long term, in a sustainable manner.
The meeting was attended by G7 members, including Canada, Germany, and Japan. Representatives from Australia, India, Mexico, and South Korea were also there. One topic was reducing reliance on China for critical minerals. China often uses its position in the rare earth market to negotiate deals and has imposed strict controls on rare earth exports. Representatives also discussed funding for new projects to support sustainable extraction and processing. And the Transportation Department says new regulatory changes could save Americans about $600 million a year while maintaining safety standards. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced the reforms yesterday. He's directing the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to modernize decades-old rules. One change updates pipeline regulations to reflect advances in technology. It allows operators to avoid unnecessary replacements and save more than $460 million annually. Another rule cuts compliance costs for transporting fuel by cargo tank, generating an additional $145 million in savings. The department is also easing compliance enforcement in regions affected by the national energy emergency, aiming to lower energy costs for families while prioritizing safety. And the Supreme Court today began hearing oral arguments in 2 cases over transgender sports. The justices will consider the legality of state laws banning men from women's sports. Idaho and West Virginia have imposed such laws, but faced legal challenges. They're appealing to the High Court to overturn lower courts' decisions that sided with their challengers. Supporters of the bans, including the Trump administration, argue they protect women's sports, while opponents argue the bans discriminate against people who identify as transgender.
Idaho's law classifies on the basis of sex because sex is what matters in sports. It correlates strongly with countless athletic advantages like size, muscle mass, bone mass, and heart and lung capacity. Tragically, but not surprisingly, male athletes have even injured female athletes in many sports. If women don't have their own competitions, they won't be able to compete. Gender identity does not matter in sports, and that's why Idaho's law does not classify on the basis of gender identity. It treats all males equally and all females equally, regardless of identity, and its purpose is exactly what the legislature said: preserving women's equal opportunity. In fact, it's our friends on the other side who want to classify based on gender identity. They're seeking special treatment for males who allegedly lack an unfair advantage, but only if those males also identify as transgender. Denying special treatment isn't classifying on the basis of transgender status. It's consciously choosing not to.
That means HB 500 is aimed at controlling for sex-based biological advantages, not for all of the many reasons one athlete may be better than another that have nothing to do with sex. On the preliminary record in this case, and as the experts below agreed, circulating testosterone after puberty is the main determinant of sex-based biological advantage that HB 500 sought to address. And on this record, Lindsay Hecox has mitigated that advantage because she has suppressed her testosterone for over a year and taken estrogen. HB 500 thus fails heightened scrutiny as applied to Lindsay and transgender women like her who have no sex-based biological advantage as compared to birth-sex females. That analysis would come out the other way for the untalented cisgender boy. He would have the same sex-based advantage, the circulating testosterone, he just would not be as good at sports. It also would come out the other way here, for example, if a transgender woman had gone through a male puberty and had not mitigated that advantage.
For analysis, we welcome Anastasia Bowden, civil rights attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation and SCOTUS blog columnist. Good to have you with us today, Anastasia.
Thanks for having me.
Now, plaintiffs are arguing that these state-level bans on boys participating in girls' sports violates the 14th Amendment. Looking at the arguments so far, which points stand out to you as strongest?
Yeah, I think the justices are really concerned with the reach of each side's arguments. So here, the challengers are saying they're really focusing on not just a broad ban, but the fact that there might be some transgender women who have mitigated their advantages. For example, by reducing their level of testosterone. And the justices are saying, okay, well, if the state requires an exception for you, then can it require exceptions for men, not even transgender women, but just men who can't compete in their own sports because they don't enjoy the same physical advantages as typical males? You know, they're shorter, they happen to have less testosterone. How many exceptions do we have to allow, and how many men do we have to allow to compete in women's sports? On the other side of the ledger, we have justices asking about the limits of that side's arguments. So the states here argue that we need to separate men and women in sports because men and women are different. And the justices are probing, well, what about certain classes? We know that men and women perform differently in certain subjects. Does that now allow states to require separate classes for them, or only remedial measures for men if they perform not as well as women on certain subjects, and women can be excluded from those subjects? So it's very interesting to see the justices not just focus on the arguments at hand, but the reach of both sides' arguments.
Yeah, and based on what you've seen, how do you think the Supreme Court might rule, and why?
I think it almost certainly will rule in favor of the states here. We know from last term that the justices are skeptical that these laws that purportedly discriminate on the basis of transgender status discriminate based on sex. They say, no, this is different. Discriminating against transgender people is not sex-based discrimination. And so, you know, Justice Barrett also indicated last term that even if we think that these laws discriminate against transgender people, that doesn't entitle them to any heightened protection, because historically transgender people haven't been subject to legal discrimination. So we're not going to treat them different or give them more protection under the Equal Protection Clause. That concurrence that she wrote is not binding, but it's a pretty good indicator of where the court's head is at. So I think they're going to say that the state has a good enough interest here to protect women in women's sports. Transgender people do not get any special protection, and they're going to defer to the state to allow the state to protect women as they wish.
If the states win, what will that all mean for women and girls' sports across the country?
Well, it doesn't mean that men and women must be separate in sports. 23 states allow transgender women to play in women's sports. It just means that those states, those 27 states who choose to act and protect women in women's sports, may do so constitutionally and legally under our civil rights laws. So it allows states to act, but it doesn't require states to act any one way. And I think, you know, all of this is borne out. You're asking me, how can we read the tea leaves here? One indication of how we can read it is the cover of Washington Post today, which says, neither science nor public opinion supports the challengers in this case. I mean, wow, what the tide has really turned here. And I think that public change of opinion is definitely going to be influential in the way that the court rules.
Yeah, fascinating. Some are arguing that privacy and safety are actually at stake here in this case. How much do you think those concerns might influence the justices?
Well, it's really interesting because typically we think of privacy and safety on behalf of the women who do not want people who were born male in the locker room. I think it's interesting to see the challengers here sort of weaponize or change that argument when we're talking about, some people have said, well, if we allow exceptions for trans women who have lower testosterone, then you're going to invade their privacy by forcing them to be subject to constant monitoring and testosterone testing, can be very invasive, requires blood tests and hormone tests and all these things. And so it's interesting to see both sides invoke this interest in privacy. But ultimately, I think the most salient thing, the things from oral argument, the arguments that hit the most were the ones that come to people from a commonsensical point of view. I mean, where do we really think the privacy concerns lie? They lie with the women who want to be safe in their locker rooms. And so ultimately, I think those are the types of arguments, the common sense ones, that are going to win the day.
And this whole case really comes to the heart of something that's been an ongoing discussion within U.S. society and culture in recent years. Is there anything missing from the discussion at this point that you think needs to be highlighted more? Just to finish.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that the challengers have talked about, well, science is evolving. We don't really know about what gives trans women advantage in women's sports, and so we shouldn't allow the state to act so bluntly. But in reality, if science is evolving, you'd think the answer would be to defer to the states and to allow them to tackle this problem as it comes and to protect women as they see best. And so ultimately, again, I just think that's common sense to people. I think it's the pulse of public opinion, and it's the reason that the court is going to come down in the state's favor.
Well, great to hear your insights today. Thank you so much for your time, Anastasia Bowden.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up, Denmark and Greenland's foreign ministers are meeting with J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. Their meeting comes as President Trump pushes to acquire the Arctic island. And the BBC files a motion to dismiss President Trump's defamation lawsuit. The president is suing the British broadcaster for splicing footage of a speech he gave on January 6, 2021. Those stories after this. I'm Stephanie Cox, and this is World Watch. The foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland are expected to meet with Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Today's face-to-face meeting comes amid President Trump's push to take control of the Arctic island. The two foreign ministers requested the meeting. Trump first floated the idea of U.S. control over Greenland in 2019 during his first term. He says U.S. control of the Danish territory is necessary to counter threats from Russia and China. Denmark's defense minister said he would participate in a meeting with NATO's Secretary General in Brussels next week. Greenland's foreign minister is expected to attend that meeting as well. And the BBC has filed a motion to dismiss President Trump's $10 billion lawsuit. The president is suing the British broadcaster for editing his speech from January 6, 2021. Trump contends that the BBC defamed him after it combined separate parts of his speech that were 50 minutes apart. As a result, the splicing of the footage made it appear that he had directed supporters to storm the U.S. Capitol. The segment omitted a section in which Trump called for peaceful protest. The BBC argued that the court in Florida lacked jurisdiction because it did not broadcast the program in Florida. The organization also said the president can't prove damages because he was re-elected after the segment aired. French farmers drove around 350 tractors through Paris toward Parliament today to protest an EU trade deal with South America. The demonstrators say the agreement threatens their livelihood. French President Emmanuel Macron and his government oppose the deal. However, the agreement is expected to be signed in Paraguay Saturday because it has the support of most other EU countries. A number of European farmers have long denounced the trade deal with Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay. They argue the move will flood the market with cheaper imports. A visiting member of Canada's parliament acknowledged Chinese aggression toward Taiwan today ahead of Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to China. The Canadian lawmaker pushed for diplomacy while in the Taiwanese capital, Taipei.
We reject the normalization of intimidation, of military coercion, of attempts to rewrite international norms through force. We believe that resilience, economic, institutional, and societal, is built through strong partnerships, also grounded in freedom, in democracy, in the rule of law, and in human rights.
Canada has no official diplomatic ties with Taiwan. However, it does have many different economic relations with Taiwan. Now, the relationship between the two countries has deepened as China ramps up military threats against the democratic island. Two lawmakers from Carney's Liberal Party ended a visit to Taiwan early this week, citing advice from the Canadian government. Carney's expected to discuss trade and international security during his trip to China. New concerns over a cover-up linking the Chinese Communist Party with live organ harvesting may have surfaced. Last week, 2 screenshots from a chat group went viral on Chinese social media before they were censored. The content in the chat has alarmed many Chinese citizens. If true, it would be the latest indication that Chinese police and hospitals are conducting operations targeting people on the streets for organ harvesting. NTD's Flora Hua has that story.
The 2 screenshots quickly went viral after the author posted them on China's version of TikTok, Douyin, on Monday. After translating the messages into English, we dubbed the conversation for listeners.
She's buying durian at the fruit stand.
Tell XYZ and the others that once she finishes the purchase, they should detain her inside the apartment building and forcibly bring her back directly in an ambulance. Don't let her go home at all.
Okay.
Judging by her physique, her body fat percentage is likely high.
You guys want to take her?
Sure. The DNA anti-rejection tests have passed. Jilin University now has liver and kidney recipients.
Has the local police station been contacted?
I just finished contacting them.
When asked whether this means local police were involved in kidnapping the woman, the post author replied with a confirmation. What's more, the reference to Jilin University in the chat likely points to one of the university's 2 affiliated hospitals. A US-based human rights group that has investigated China's transplant industry for decades has listed both hospitals as highly suspected of engaging in large-scale live organ harvesting. The group was the first one to report that Falun Gong practitioners in China have been the primary target for their organs. The Chinese Communist Party has been brutally persecuting the faith group since 1999. But in recent years, the scale of organ harvesting victims appears to have grown, with increasing media reports of young people going missing in China. Now, both the screenshots and the whistleblower's Douyin account have been completely removed from the platform by Chinese regulators. The censorship has only made the claims more convincing to many, but the story has still left digital footprints. Search records on the platform, such as "What happened to the woman kidnapped?" show that many users tried to learn the fate of the woman mentioned in the chat. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Great report there from Flora Hua. Next, Elon Musk's X is facing growing scrutiny after reports that its AI chatbot Grok was used to generate non-consensual sexualized images of women and children. Several countries have taken action, with regulators investigating or blocking access to the tool. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
The UK's media regulator, Ofcom, has launched an investigation into Elon Musk's Grok AI chatbot following reports that the tool was used to create sexually explicit deepfake images, including those involving minors. The British government is set to enforce a new law this week that criminalizes creating sexual deepfakes, calling the content a form of online abuse.
The Internet Watch Foundation reports criminal imagery of children as young as 11, including girls sexualized and topless. This is child sexual abuse.
Kendall says reports show images of women in bikinis as well as in abusive and disturbing situations. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called the images disgusting and unlawful.
Lives can and have been devastated by this content, which is designed to harass, torment, and violate people's dignity.
European Union officials have also condemned the platform, warning tech companies they will act if users are not protected. They say regulators can take action and issue fines if rules aren't followed.
They can investigate the service, they can issue enforcement action, and if that enforcement action is not complied with, they can fine the platform £18 million or 10% of their worldwide revenue, whichever is greater.
Southeast Asian countries are also taking action. Indonesia and Malaysia have temporarily blocked access to Grok, citing risks to women, children, and public safety. However, Elon Musk has responded, saying X removes the illegal content, stating, "We take action against illegal content on X, including child sexual abuse material, by removing it permanently, suspending accounts, and working with local governments and law enforcement as necessary." He goes on to say, anyone using or prompting Grok to make illegal content will suffer the same consequences as if they upload illegal content. Musk made almost exactly the same statement on January 3rd. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And President Trump is traveling to Michigan today with stops planned in Detroit and Dearborn as he highlights manufacturing and economic priorities. The president is set to address the Detroit Economic Club during an event at Motor City Casino. The club says it will be Trump's third address there. On the campaign trail in 2024, he joined a list of speakers, including former Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Bush's Sr. and Jr. Trump will also tour Ford Motor Company's historic Rouge Center, where the automaker builds its F-Series trucks. Ford says the visit will showcase American workers putting the automobile within reach of every American. Trump was last in Michigan in April 2025 to celebrate the first 100 days of his second term. Here's the president speaking to reporters before departing the White House earlier. Take a listen.
We're going to Detroit. We'll be talking about how well the economy is doing. As you know, the inflation numbers just came out, and we have very low inflation. So that would give Powell the chance to give us a nice, beautiful, big rate cut, which would be great for the country, but rates are falling also, and growth is going up. We have tremendous growth numbers, so growth is going up. So I'll be talking about that today in Detroit. It's a big speech, and I can only say that the country is doing well.
The Supreme Court today began hearing oral arguments in 2 cases over transgender sports. The justices will consider the legality of state laws banning men from women's sports. Idaho and West Virginia have imposed such laws, but face legal challenges. They're appealing to the High Court to overturn lower courts' decisions that sided with their challengers. Supporters of the bans, including the Trump administration, argue they protect women's sports, while opponents argue the bans discriminate against people who identify as transgender.
Idaho's law classifies on the basis of sex because sex is what matters in sports. It correlates strongly with countless athletic advantages like size, muscle mass, bone mass, and heart and lung capacity. Tragically, but not surprisingly, male athletes have even injured female athletes in many sports. If women don't have their own competitions, they won't be able to compete. Gender identity does not matter in sports, and that's why Idaho's law does not classify on the basis of gender identity. It treats all males equally and all females equally, regardless of identity, and its purpose is exactly what the legislature said: preserving women's equal opportunity. In fact, it's our friends on the other side who want to classify based on gender identity. They're seeking special treatment for males who allegedly lack an unfair advantage, but only if those males also identify as transgender. Denying special treatment isn't classifying on the basis of transgender status. It's consciously choosing not to.
That means HB 500 is aimed at controlling for sex-based biological advantages, not for all of the many reasons one athlete may be better than another that have nothing to do with sex. On the preliminary record in this case, and as the experts below agreed, Circulating testosterone after puberty is the main determinant of sex-based biological advantage that HB 500 sought to address. And on this record, Lindsay Hecox has mitigated that advantage because she has suppressed her testosterone for over a year and taken estrogen. HB 500 thus fails heightened scrutiny as applied to Lindsay and transgender women like her who have no sex-based biological advantage as compared to birth-sex females. That analysis would come out the other way for the untalented cisgender boy. He would have the same sex-based advantage, the circulating testosterone, he just would not be as good at sports. It also would come out the other way here, for example, if a transgender woman had gone through a male puberty and had not mitigated that advantage.
As the U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments in blockbuster cases challenging transgender sports bans, House Speaker Mike Johnson showed his support outside the Supreme Court.
I'm the dad of 2 girls. My girls were athletes as well. We know what's fair and what's right. I'm proud to stand with you as we fight to protect female-only spaces and sports, and truly the future of women's athletics. Every Republican here in this House is with you. We stand in solidarity with you, and you know that. And every young woman and girl has the right to compete safely and fairly.
And that's all we have time for this hour, but if you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at news.today@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'll cover more news right after this break.